Hi everyone, welcome to our first live episode of Palestinians Podcast. My name is Nadia Abladam, and today I'm joined by Yasmin Mjali, and we're here today to talk about Yasmin's story and to get to know her a little bit more, just as we would on a audio podcast. We're actually here in my home, and I hope that you're enjoying us and listening to us from your home as well. We'd love for you to be comfortable, maybe have a cup of tea like we have, and just enjoy some storytelling. So Yasmin, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so I'm a Palestinian American, raised between Palestine and North Carolina. I'm a feminist, women's rights activist, and a social entrepreneur, and I'm currently based in Ramallah, Palestine.
In Ramallah. So you were born and raised here in the United States and moved to Palestine very recently.
Yeah, just almost a year and a half ago.
Okay, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
So as a Palestinian American, as someone born in the United States, can you tell me about when you first realized or actually understood that you were Palestinian?
Well, okay, so that depends on what you define Palestinian identity as. So I was always aware, like growing up in rural North Carolina in a school system that was 96% white, I was always sort of made to feel different, even if I couldn't quite put my finger on why I was different. It's like I never had my parents sit me down and say, okay, you're a Muslim, you're Palestinian, you're Arab, here's what all of these things mean. No, it was like they never explained it, and they sort of expected me to know and respect those things. And so I remember kind of being really confused growing up. In third grade, one time, my mom packed me a Ziploc bag of pomegranate, which I loved. And I remember pulling it out in school in the middle of kids who were pulling out Nutter Butters and Doritos, and here I am with my little pomegranate Ziploc baggie. And this one girl at my table, she looks over, she's like, "What is that?" And I explained, because as an American, I guess she'd never been exposed to pomegranate as this really kind of exotic fruit. And I explained it to her, and she was like, "That's weird." And I didn't even eat my snack that day. I was so embarrassed, and I never asked for it again. And especially coming home from Christmas was always the worst. All the kids had to write down an entire paragraph of what you did for Christmas, what were the traditions that you celebrated, what were the gifts that you got, and I never knew what to write. I would just sort of make something up just for the sake of being included, and I knew that the other kids were Christian, or I didn't know that they were Christian and I was Muslim. At the age of 8 or 7 or 8, you don't understand those things quite yet, and I've never been explained those things, and so I knew that they were there, but I didn't know why and what they were. Or one time in second grade, I was in kindergarten, the whole class had Zaxby's for lunch, and they ordered a bunch of ham sandwiches for everyone. I didn't know the difference between the different types of meat, so I'm eating my ham sandwich, and my teacher comes running over and grabs it from my hands. She's like, "No, she ate the meat!" Talking to the assistant teachers. And I get the class goes quiet, and they're staring at me, and I don't know what I did wrong. No one explained that I couldn't eat pork, and so she swaps it for a PB&J, and I was so mad. Everyone else got ham sandwiches. Why was I singled out? So in this sense, I was always aware that I was different, and I never understood why. And it was always fine, because I would go to Palestine in the summer and I fit in there, right? At least with the kids. We would play, and no one asked those things. It was just our number one job during summer was to play, Beit Beaut, right? So coming back was always the worst after the summer ended. And I was aware, as I got older, I was aware of what Palestine was. Politically speaking, I knew that we were occupied. I knew that there was an occupying power. I didn't understand the intricacies quite yet, especially as a young child. Yahud in my head didn't mean Jewish. I thought it meant soldier. And so I was always scared of that word. And so later on I realized there were the nuances of the occupation, but it never quite touched me as I was raised here. And when I went to Palestine, we were in Tubas, my teta's village, and we were luckily sort of untouched by everything else that was going on. And it wasn't until I moved back to Palestine that I suddenly, outside of my home with my family, because I live alone, outside of that context and outside of the US, I was able to start understanding what it meant, because it was a daily basis. And suddenly, I have a green ID, I have a Hawaiiya, And when I finally had the courage to go to Jerusalem, I remember my first time crossing the border. It was so terrifying because we really were treated like animals, and there was no, like, the US passport was just totally futile. Suddenly I didn't have this magic card, this golden ticket. And the way that Israelis talked down to me made me incredibly aware of myself as a Palestinian within a political context, not quite a cultural context. So that's when that became very apparent to me.
And that's pretty recent, I mean, in the scheme of things.
Right, yeah, it's only the last year of my life.
And so how has that influenced other areas of your life, that sort of recognition or that awareness of your Palestinianness?
The political understanding? Well, it's so, as a woman living in Palestine, it's inseparable from political understanding to know your place as a woman, right? You're pretty quickly you're made to understand, okay, because you're a woman, these are the things that you can and cannot do, you're forbidden from, you're allowed to do. So, for example, one of the things I had a really hard time with when I moved to Palestine was sexual harassment. And I didn't know that there was like a sort of unspoken code of conduct. So coming from the South, where I'm a very friendly sort of person, I didn't know that saying hello to everyone on the streets or hi, how are you, or having conversations was sort of sometimes taken as a sexual dance, right? Because women are meant to be, traditionally speaking, these sort of timid, quiet, docile creatures. And when I broke those barriers, it not only made me seem like a sexually promiscuous kind of woman, but also inherently un-Palestinian. So I remember all cab drivers, waiters, shop owners were always like, okay, so where are you from? And even though I'd spoken a perfect, flawless Arabic, you know, and I was covered, there was something wrong. And I remember pushed to the point of frustration one day. I was so tired of being singled out that I asked the cab driver, I said, okay, what is it about me that makes me seem un-Palestinian? And he told me it's because you're making eye contact with me and you talk very loudly and you hold yourself up very confidently. And I remember that rung with me for quite a bit. And eventually I wanted to feel Palestinian, so I think subconsciously I sort of started embracing those characteristics to my own sort of demise.
And that was going to ask, did it change your behavior in any way?
Yeah, it did. I became depressed, right? Because your whole life you're raised to be this sort of friendly, amiable person that you're friends with everyone. And then suddenly when that turns on you and ends up being a reason that you're the object of sexualization on the streets and you're made to feel afraid, you have to just completely turn yourself off as a human being. That's a depressing thing. It's kind of heartbreaking, and I had to do that, like to leave the house to go to the ATM or to go to the store for groceries. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't smile at people. You know, I would stop choosing my outfits because I wanted to wear something cute. I wore something that was safe, and I was, you know, after enough time, I was unhappy with who I had become, and unhappy because it felt like I was being betrayed by my own people. This is Palestine, these are my people, this is my culture, and I want to be proud and I want to be happy, but why are they making it so that I'm not? And I wanted to understand what were the constructs that played here that made it really hard to identify with my people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that, in a way, has also played into your identity as well. I mean, it seems like the commentary was that you clearly didn't grow up here, right?
Yeah.
Like you grew up somewhere else. So there's some distance there between you and the cab driver or between you and the person in the store.
Right.
How did that make you view sort of your American identity, I guess? Or how did that change your vision of yourself? You said it changed your behavior, but what else did it sort of do to your own identity formation?
Oh, it made it so confusing. Because growing up, I remember one time, for example, being in the back of a car. So I was in the US at this point, I'm in middle school, and I'm in the back of the car. One of my friend's moms is driving us to a movie. And so we're all in the back and we're talking and we're excited, and I'm telling a story. And I must have, in the story, called myself a white girl and referred to myself as white, because the mom, she turns around from the front seat and goes, honey, you're not white. And I remember just being stunned into silence. No one had ever told me that before. And when everyone around you is a certain thing, you almost just, you just assume that identity. And it was so shocking to be singled out so abruptly.
Mm.
And that happened more and more as I got older. So I was always inherently aware that I was not white, which in my head meant also not American, because Americans are really good at making it seem like if you're American, then you're just white.
Sure.
And then I came to Palestine, I thought, okay, my people, they look like me, they sound like me, and suddenly I'm not Palestinian either. Everyone sort of was like, okay, the gig's up, where are you from?
Right.
So I started occupying this liminal space, and my vision changed. I wasn't this, and I wasn't this, and everything sort of became really confusing for me.
And so where does that leave you now? I mean, a year and a half later, if you're not this and you're not that, what are you? I mean, where does that put you?
That's a good question. So for me, it was a matter of reinterpreting what the liminal space meant, right? It's so easy for that space to be marginalized, for people to demonize that space. Like, if you're not this and you're not that, it's easy to feel homeless and stateless and without a community. And that's a lot of the reason that I started my movement and my startup, was because I wanted to build a community that were full of people deviating from the norm, whether by their own choice or by their birth and their upbringing, and everyone, like, bring them out of the shadows and into a community in which they felt like they were supported and they weren't the only ones, and it was celebrated when you deviated from the norm. And so I sort of so it's like, if you can't change a situation, for me it's change the way you think about a situation. So for me, okay, I'm in the middle space. Let's change what that means for me. So it didn't have to mean stateless or anything. It could mean that I was free to forge my own path. I wasn't tied to this standard or this standard. I could define my own path. And that sort of became a really beautiful thing when I started thinking about it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's from my perspective, almost a feeling of empowerment. Yeah. Or the fact that you were able to take a step and create a movement, which we'll talk about, seems like you felt empowered to do so. Where did that empowerment come from for you? Was that something you were taught? Was that something that was sort of something your mother or your father sort of put in you? Or was that something that sort of just came from within?
I think it might be a balance of both, a combination of both. So my father was a workaholic, and so my mother was left to raise us, and with 6 kids, mashallah, she always had her hands full with something. So it's easy for us to kind of retreat into our rooms and do what we wanted. So for example, my favorite movie from the moment it came out until today is Mulan. And she thought it was harmless, especially because my mom only speaks Arabic. She didn't know exactly what was being portrayed. And so for me, I saw this heroine, this woman breaking the norms, just taking back her own and forging a new path for women and herself. And she was my role model. And I didn't know this until looking back. I watched it a few weeks ago, and I was just like, oh my God, I am Mulan. Right? Palestinian Mulan. And it's funny, looking back at my bookshelf, I had always been attracted to novels or autobiographies of women that were celebrated for breaking the norm, even if it was a posthumous sort of celebration.
So how are you breaking the norm? What is this movement that you've created? What's the goal?
So, okay, I've created, this is not the Not Your Habibti movement in Palestine is a movement.
Perhaps we can stop on the name.
Yeah.
Not Your Habibti. What does that mean for those who might not speak Arabic?
Yeah, so Habibti in Arabic is loosely translated into my dear or my love. And just because of the way that the word is written, it's inherently that you are owned by someone, right? It's inseparable from my. So when someone says it's my love or my dear, there is a power dynamic there, and I wanted to challenge that. And so I'm saying, not your habibti. You were reclaiming yourself as a woman. You're reclaiming your body, and your independence there. So when I painted that on a jacket for myself and wore it on International Women's Day of 2017, I posted a photo of it and it went viral. People wanted to know where they could get it, where I bought it, if I made
Including
it.
Including
me. And so I was like, okay, there's something here. There's a community that could be built and need to be addressed, a conversation to have, right? What about this is so interesting that people want to wear it and to own it? So it led me down this path of simultaneously building a startup, but also a dialogue about the things that we were all sort of terrified to talk about. one of the reasons that I was so depressed after experiencing sexual harassment in Palestine was because I never talked about it. No one had ever created a space, socially speaking, in which we could talk about and express these, what were really horrifying issues. And so we almost have to normalize it until we can't anymore, right? Until it's an issue that starts being counterproductive, personally speaking. And I feel like for anyone to heal from a trauma, smaller or larger, for anyone to heal, you have to express. And when a woman or a man or anyone between doesn't have the space to express, the trauma only grows sort of more heavy within them. And I knew that I needed to heal, and that I also wanted to catalyze collective change. So the startup came at this while I was building a conversation about, okay, what's going on here? What are the societal constructs in place? Why are they there? How are we reacting to them? And how are they confining us? And did those constructs mean that they were inherently Palestinian or Arab? Like, could I be an Arab woman and a feminist at the same time? Why did those seem like two mutually exclusive things? I see. Yeah.
So it's almost, you created this movement as sort of a way to explore your own identity.
Exactly. Yeah, and it almost in hindsight, it sort of seems like a selfish thing. Like I had an issue, and I wanted to find out more about myself, to resolve that issue internally, and to build a community in which I felt accepted, and at home. And so I did build that community, and it's a really beautiful thing, and I feel grateful to have that community. But it is definitely, and every day, it's an ongoing process, not just for me, but for everyone I meet while on this journey, that we are dismantling and deconstructing what it means to be a woman or a man within the Arab world, and not just within the Arab world, but the Arab world within an international context that has demonized us. And that's really interesting. There are so many factors at play that it seems like an endless journey to figure out who you are.
And also, if I may add another layer of complexity, and a full disclosure, Yasmin and I went out to lunch before this to talk a little bit, and I think there's another context which is important to note here, which is the context of occupation.
Yeah.
And I think that that's another layer that I'd love to hear your perspective on. What is the role of a women's rights movement within the occupation?
So I've gotten many comments in my work from women, actually, that we need to deal with and end occupation before we can address women's rights, before we can address any social issues. And the more I got it, the more I was sort of stunned by this response, because in my head, okay, we've been occupied for 70 years. And that's a number of generations of women who have been like, okay, just wait for this to end. And when that means that generations have gone by in which women continue to be oppressed and discriminated against for the sake of occupation, right? And I don't want another day to go by in which someone is suffering or metaphorically buried because of our terror of addressing these issues and dismantling like this fragile male ego upon which our society has been built. And that's not just a Palestinian thing, that's all over the world. And I think in order to catalyze productive change, we need to be ready and willing to criticize our own society. And that's all over the world. And I think that could be a really scary thing, because especially in occupation, when your identity is already threatened in its own existence, it's scary to go ahead and criticize that identity, right? And so people say to me, we have to deal with occupation before we can deal with women's rights. And I respond, no, we can do it collectively and simultaneously. It's a team effort. So you can work on this, and I can work on this, and together we can catalyze social, legal, economic change and political change in the eyes of occupation.
So, and it seems like that's exactly what you're doing. You've gone ahead and you've created this movement, and it seems from my perspective there's sort of two ways that this movement is working. As you said, you have a startup, which is an apparel line, which I'd like to hear more about. But the other part is what you called sort of a social engagement art project.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could tell our viewers sort of what that project is about. And I know that that's what brought you here to the United States, so I'd love to hear about that project.
Yeah. So I have this, it's also titled Not Your Habibti, the Typewriter Project. And just a little bit of context. So it's a genre of art, just as there are other genres like photography or sculpture or painting, This is a newly emerging genre in the last 20 years or so. And it's not really this tangible thing, the art itself, but rather it lies within the interaction between two human beings. That is now what is considered the art form.
Okay.
And so I wanted to, in a society where it felt like no one was interacting, to talk about this really terrifying and heart and affecting issue of harassment and discrimination. I wanted to break that barrier and connect individuals, even if they were strangers. And so I took this typewriter, and I put it, my first debut was in the streets of Ramallah, in Douarsa, Clock Circle. I set up on the sidewalk, and for 5 hours I invited people walking by to stop and talk to me and share their stories of sexual harassment. And that, for me, it was really interesting, because I was asking someone to share an incredibly, not only taboo, but intimate sort of issue in a really public space. And it was sort of a commentary on who controls space, right? Because when you're harassed, a lot of the time it is on the streets. So it's really sort of strange for someone to open up about it in the very place in which they experience it. And so, for example, on that day, I asked 200 women to step forward, and only 34 actually shared their stories with me. And that's understandable. It's a really scary thing, not only to open up, but to do so in a public way.
But you also mentioned that there was a language issue there with the way that you were asking women and sort of what they responded to. Would you mind speaking about that a little bit?
Yeah. So at the first few hours, I was asking people a general question. It's, have you ever experienced sexual harassment or assault? And after a startling number of women responded no, I sort of just like scratched my head and was just like, okay, surprised, said thank you, and moved on. And after enough responses rolled in with that same answer, I said, okay, let me rephrase the question and dig deeper. So I asked them, has anyone ever said an inappropriate comment to you on the streets? And that's when they were like, oh, that? Yeah, totally. But does that count? And so the translation for me was, okay, we've normalized sexual harassment on the streets. It's become background noise for women, and it's reached a point at which they're not even aware of it anymore. And it's just become an everyday experience. Yeah.
And so you've now continued this process of collecting stories from women, and my understanding is that you collect these stories on a typewriter.
Yes.
And sort of what's that process been like for you? Where has it brought you? What are the most exciting things that have resulted from that project?
So for me, on an individual level, hearing these women's stories has been phenomenal, because they're complete strangers. I don't know them outside of the context of the typewriter project. And to hear them verbalize things that it's so easy to think that, okay, I was the only one dealing with this, was such a beautiful process of healing for me, because I realized I wasn't alone, and this is really a universal issue. And to sort of bridge that divide was really nice. And I think not just for me, but for them as well. And then it's been very exciting because the typewriter project has moved beyond Palestine. So it went from the streets to coffee shops and then to universities there. And then 2 weeks ago, it was in Italy, and it collected stories there. And now it's doing the US tour. So I started at Dartmouth. I've been at Harvard, Boston College, Brown, and I'll be continuing down the East Coast to the South.
And I'm so glad that you went on this tour, because that's what allowed us to sit in the same room and have this conversation together. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the fact that you were also able to exhibit your work in Italy. What was that experience like? What did the exhibit look like? Things like that.
Yeah, so I want to start with the typewriting aspect itself, because going from Palestine to Italy, you assume that there's this huge cultural gap. And it's easy when you arrive to Italy or think of Italy to think only of the art, the food, the architecture, and you forget to look sort of beneath that at the actual societal and political structure. And it actually is incredibly similar to Palestinian and Arab identity in the way that it is patriarchy. And I actually learned from people who shared their stories with me that it's common, for example, in Italy, that jealous boyfriends will kill girlfriends. Or up until the late 80s, it was legal to kill your wife, and it was deemed a crime of passion. And to hear that was simultaneously disturbing yet vindicating, because it only proves to me further that patriarchy isn't inherently Arab. It is really this universal issue. And even though I knew that, it was different to see it really made manifest from people within that country and on such a personal, intimate sort of level. And the same has been true coming to the US. But in Italy, it was really interesting because I was also able to exhibit the letters that I got in Palestine, which have now probably reached over 100. And then, so they're exhibited in a coffin, and participants are invited to come open this coffin and pull out letters and to read them. And the reason I chose this coffin, which is it's a child-sized coffin, so it's about 1 meter long, and so it refers to this pre-Islamic practice of wa'ad al-banat, which means the burying young girls alive. And it would happen because tribes were afraid that once she grew into a woman, that she would bring dishonor upon the family through sexual misconduct or any sort of deviation from the norm. And so to prevent any possibility of that, they would bury her alive as soon as she was born. And that practice was condemned as soon as the Quran was written. And there's actually in Surat al-Takwir, it refers to this practice, and it claims that on Judgment Day, these girls who were killed for this practice and this reason will be given a space before God to use their voice and share their story and illustrate who has wronged them. And then God will give them the divine right to ascend into heaven. So in this instance, it is the young girl and her voice that gives her catharsis and relief and that journey of healing. And I wanted to replicate that because for me, sharing your story is so critical. And so I put all of these stories in a coffin to elicit this idea of resurrection, right? So when you as a participant come to the coffin and you pull out these girls' stories, you are allowing their stories to be shared, thus helping them begin that journey of healing.
Yeah. It's really beautiful. And I hope that I'll be able to see that in person one day. It sounds like it's an incredible exhibition. And you've been on this tour from sort of university to university, hoping to elicit more stories from an American context.
Yeah.
Have you found that the stories you're collecting and the experiences you're collecting, are they universal? I mean, are they truly universal? Are women experiencing the same sort of things all over the world?
Yeah. I wasn't sure what to expect when I came to the US because it is so different. And it's easy to think that the US has progressed so far beyond these gender-based issues and sexual harassment and assault. And it's not that. It's that it's just been disguised a little differently. And so when I come here and I go to these campuses and I share my story and then invite others to share their stories, it is so sobering and jarring to hear them because it really is a copy-paste of what I've heard within my own life, experienced within my own life, but also heard from other young girls. If I gave you all the letters from Italy, Palestine, and the US and put them in front of a map and asked you to pin them in the location that they came from, you wouldn't be able to. It is really universal.
That is powerful. So the other aspect of your work is actually a clothing line. And you mentioned before, and actually one of the reasons I know about Yasmin's work is because I saw that picture of a jean jacket with "Not Your Habibti" written on the back. Yeah. Can you tell me what that clothing line has transformed into? What's your goal with that project?
Yeah. So it was a startup that was launched in April of 2017. And I didn't know this at the time, but in retrospect, I was like, oh, I'm a social entrepreneur. And so you start this enterprise with the goal of addressing a certain social issue. And that's what I've done. From day one, I made these jackets with this phrase on the back and then a few other phrases that were similar. And from day one, I knew I wanted to address issues that no one was talking about. I remember specifically one time I was in Bethlehem with a role model of mine. We had become very close, and she told me, kind of casually, that someone just up north of the village that we were in was killed because of honor. And I just thought, why wasn't that in the newspapers? Why wasn't that on the news? Why wasn't that on every tongue? And I think that struck me in a way because it's almost easy to think that honor killings are in the storybooks of our history, right? And so for someone to so casually share it and then move on as if it wasn't a big deal was shocking to me. And that was just around the same time that I was thinking to launch this. And I think that was one of the reasons that I thought, okay, I want to give back. I need to structure this entrepreneurship in a way that I can address these issues and start a conversation and maybe sort of down the line affect some sort of change. I needed a conversation.
And so what is it that you produce?
So I produce t-shirts that are made in Ramallah, but the number one, I guess, most selling thing and my favorite thing and what is our trademark now is like this denim jacket, which is made in Gaza, and then embroidered in the West Bank, and they're written now with all of these different things. But that's what we produce, and then one of the biggest questions I get is why fashion? Like, why was that your tool that you decided to use to talk about these issues?
Right.
And I'm sure you know, it's like when you're walking in the streets and someone makes a comment, you immediately feel self-conscious. And for me, it reached a point in which, again, I was choosing my outfits to minimize my own body significance, right? To move inconspicuously to the streets. And I hated that. And I felt like I couldn't wear my favorite things, and I couldn't feel beautiful without feeling like a slut, and I couldn't. And so I was like, okay, let me reclaim that. Let's create a piece of clothing that people are proud to wear and feel empowered in. And it's not really a shield, but a tool.
Yeah. And where have you shipped these clothes? I mean, like, have they gone everywhere? What's the most exciting order you've gotten?
Oh, maybe. So they're everywhere. They're South Africa, Germany, New Zealand, Australia, France, Finland, all over the world, and mostly the US, and of course in Palestine and Jordan. The most exciting one for me was Singapore, because when that order came in, I almost thought it was spam. I was just like, there's no way, like someone all the way out in Singapore wants to wear this. And then the girl, the customer who bought the jacket, actually messaged me personally, and she explained her story. And she is a Muslim woman raised in Singapore, and when she saw my work and this movement, she really identified with it. And she identified with this idea of not belonging to one culture and not quite being in another. And so she wanted to get behind the movement 100%.
Wow. That's pretty cool. And it sort of speaks to the goal that you had of starting this, which was creating a community that had a common goal, right? And I think that's really powerful.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. So we are going to wrap up shortly. If you do have any comments or questions, this would be a good time to post them on the live streams on both Facebook and Instagram, and we'll do a quick check before we wrap up. But I wanted to mention that sort of you're getting ready to transition back to the United States. And I was just curious to hear about sort of your feelings about coming back here, having been in Palestine for almost 2 years now. What are your feelings about that? What are your goals for your time in the U.S.?
So just to give it some context, I'm coming back to the U.S. because I'm starting grad school in the fall, and I feel so mixed about it. I feel proud because I'm going back with a purpose, right? I want to study gender policy, and I see it as a tool to continue further down my journey of women's rights activism. But I'm also nervous and a little afraid because I didn't realize it, but coming back to the US has been a little heartbreaking because unfortunately this society is a bubble in a lot of ways, and it is sort of self-contained and removed from the rest of the world's tragic reality. And so for me, coming back from this experience in which I was connected with my Palestinianhood in a way that I had never been connected, and then coming back to a place where I probably have to defend it is sort of a difficult thing.
Yeah. But we're going to be happy to have you back here in the U.S. Where can people connect with your movement if they wanted to connect with you? Could you tell people where to connect with it?
Yeah, so go to our website, Baby Fist. That's baby-fist.com, and there you can shop the apparel, but you can also browse through our tabs. Like, you can trace the impact of your order to see how this is giving back to the community, to read about the organization that we donate 10% of our proceeds to. You can also read the blog posts there. And then on Facebook and Instagram, we're Baby Fist.
Perfect. And I hope that you do go and engage with Yasmin's work and Yasmin's organization. We're so grateful to have had this conversation in person. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Palestinians Podcast aims to tell stories of Palestinians from all over the world. And we're lucky to have heard Yasmin's story today. We've produced over 25 episodes of content that you can access both on our website, www.palestinianspodcast.com, or through our social media outlets, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you haven't listened to podcasts before, we ask that you just give us a try and give us a listen, and we hope that you'll enjoy and interact with us. I also wanted to mention that we do live storytelling events in cities across the United States, and we'd love to come to a city near you. If you're interested, you can feel free to contact us as well. That information is on the website. We're so grateful that you decided to spend a part of your afternoon with us. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation and that you learned a little bit more about not only Yasmin's movement and story, but also the power of storytelling, both as a way to unite people in a common cause, but also to create connection across space. And I feel like that's really what Yasmin's project and our project really aims to do. It really aims to have storytelling be at the forefront of creating community. And thank you for being part of that community and for joining us today. We hope that you have a beautiful, beautiful day. Thank you.
I don't think this one's ending.